husband created this little looseplex booklet of the looseplexes, which is actually made of one sheet of paper and folded and cut in a way. Now I hope I can get it back together. Yes. That makes it a little booklet. And if you buy my book tonight, you'll get a free copy of this. So you have to enter a code catwalk. But I think Amanda put that in the chat. But this form duplex, looseplex came from Jericho Brown, who created a sonnet called a duplex that I heard about from Amanda Moore and I read about. And his poems are sonnets, and they are made up of lines of 9 and 11 syllables created from cut lines of previous work. And his are extremely intricate. They're much more rigid in form than mine. But that idea of taking your old failed poetry and salvaging lines of 9 or 11 syllables and turning them into something new was so exciting to me. I couldn't resist it. And let me tell you, the visceral thrill of taking a scissors to a poem that you have worked on for months and just never made it, but was really important to you, and taking those lines and doing something else with them is amazing. It's just a wonderful experience. And so this one, despite everything spring, I really feel kind of echoes this particular period, even though it's not spring anymore. So I'm just going to read it. Despite everything spring, no one was watching. We searched the silence like farmer in drought, ears open for rain. Each morning, each evening, scatter of yellow. Whatever else is here, it's spring, a framework for the rags of this world. Real joy mixed with a certain uncertainty. Overnight, a fuzz of tender green. It glints and shimmers, pulls me toward it, strong carpet of newborn shoots under last year's weeds. 5 billion miles away, a galaxy dies. Aretha's hat, Yo-Yo Ma's delight. Is this our work, to love what is here? To move along the skin of this earth, married like enamel to the tooth. And you know, that hat was from Obama's inauguration. Do you remember Aretha's hat? He wore this amazing church lady hat. It was a creation about 5 miles high, silver, glittering. And that's here in the poem. So Jane, why don't you talk a little bit about a form that you created, which is a little mysterious to me?
Well, I only once invented a form. There was a reason. I was asked to invent a form. I went, oh no, I don't do things like that. And then, as so often happens with me, a couple of days later, I was thinking, well, I don't do things like that. But if I were to do something like that, I wonder what I would do. And I'm not going to read you one of these. They're from an earlier book. They're from Given Sugar, Given Salt. There's 2 of them. They're called Inflections. And the form is a little hard to notice until you know it's there. And then it's absolutely obvious, which is, you know how when you learn a language, you have to learn the conjugations and the inflections of the verbs. I, you, he, she, it, we, plural you, they. So both inflections, and sometimes they do it for more than one line, and one of the poems, the he, she, it, are all there in the line. And it's a very interesting form to do once or twice in a lifetime, because it lets you feel the engine that each of these pronouns is. That if you start a statement with a certain pronoun, you are being sent down a certain angle of relationship with whatever your material is. So sonnets are endlessly useful. You could spend a lifetime writing sonnets, haiku the same. Inflections, no. You do it once or twice or 3 times. You don't need to do it more than that. But it's very interesting to do it those times. But the form I'm going to read you a poem from is one I certainly did not invent. I'm going to read you a poem from Ledger in the form known as none of us, most of us can pronounce it correctly, Ghazal, Ghazal, Ghazal. This is an Urdu Persian poetry form. It has very strict rules in the original. It has a very particular rhyme scheme, but it relates to Merrill's loose plexes in that part of the feeling of a ghazal is long-lined couplets which don't bear a very strong connection to one another. They are independent statements jutted up against each other, being held together by rhyme and form. Now, the American ghazal is a little different from the strict ghazal. It is much looser and doesn't obey the rules. One of the rules is your own name should be in the penultimate line. And my ghazal is definitely an American ghazal, the way, so Terence Hayes made famous the American sonnet, but people have been writing American sonnets for a long time. Just a looser example of the form. So the repeating word in my poem only repeats from time to time. The other things make the same sound. It's the word open. And so it's a sound-driven poem. It is also a poem that makes reference to a famous piece of music by the French composer Messiaen, his Quartet for the End of Time. This is one of the environmental poems. It's Ghazal for the End of Time. Break anything, a window, a pie crust, a glacier, it will break open. A voice cannot speak, cannot sing without lips, teeth, lamina propria coming open. Some breakage can barely be named, hardly be spoken. Rains stopped, roof said. Fires, forests, cities, cellars peeled open. Tears stopped, eyes said. An unbearable music fell instead from them. A clarinet stripped of its breathing, the cello abandoned. The violin grieving, a hand too long empty held open. The imperial piano, its 89th, 90th, 91st strings unsummoned, unwoken. Watching, listening was like that, the low, wordless humming of being unwoven. Fish vanished, bees vanished, bats whitened, Arctic ice opened. Hands wanted more time, hands thought we had time, spending time's rivers, its meadows, its mountains, its instruments, tuning their silence, its deep mantle broken. Earth stumbled within and outside us. Orca, thistle, kestrel withheld their instruction. Rock said, burning ones, pry your own blindness open. Death said, now I too am orphan. This poem is desperately dark, and it actually terrified me, especially that last statement. What would it mean for death to be an orphan? It would mean there were no life left. And it still frightens me. It's a very hard poem to read. And I followed it with another poem almost as an apology for having gone into such despair as this holds. But I want to go back to the title of the loose plex that Merrill read. Now, despite everything, that despite everything spirit. This has been such a dark time for many of us, the pandemic, the politics, the fires, and yet we need that despite everything terribly. And your catwalk is so filled with eros and the senses and eating and pleasure. And so I'm going to ask you to lighten everyone's spirit with a poem from a different direction, please.
Okay, well, this poem, I'll just read it. But I have to say, Jane, the fact that you can articulate the despair somehow makes it bearable for me. And I so appreciate that. So, but this is a completely different tone. And I'll just read it. Why size has almost nothing to do with it. At the party, when you've collapsed on the couch, leaving the mess for the morning, and he gets up as if it were the most natural thing and fills one sink with soapy water and starts moving the sponge along each plate and cup until the dishwasher is full. Nothing sexier than his hands dripping soap suds, his love handles peeping out from his shirt as he moves his fingers down, around, and over, nudging the crud from the tines of the forks, emptying the sink. Nothing hotter than the tendons of his arms as he swabs the counter. And when he's done, your fatigue has disappeared and you can't get to him fast enough. And even the longest schlong in Cincinnati can't compete with that. I think, really, foreplay is all about dishwashing. That's all.
What a strategic remark.
Actually, I read that poem at a reading, and a guy came up to me, an older guy, afterwards. He says, "I'm going right home and washing the dishes."
Exactly.
I felt the message had been heard. But Jane, you have some lighter poems also. So
Well, I'm not going to read a lighter poem. I'm going to read a size poem.
yeah.
So nothing lighter about it, alas.
Well,
All my erotic poems are in my earlier books. There's gosh, I've always remembered, who was it? There was an older poet at a festival that we once coincided at who said, there should be no poetry reading without some eros in it. Thank you for doing it this time. I must have something in Ledger, but that's not where my mind went. My mind went to a size poem.
right.
So this is
you.
another environmental one. So the Haldane in the first line is the famous biologist whose famous essay is referred to. Ant's Nest. On Being the Right Size, Haldane's short essay is titled. An ant's nest can be found at the top of a redwood. No bird that weighs less than, no insect more than. The minimum mass for a whale, for a language, an ice cap. In a human-sized room, someone is setting a human-sized table with yellow napkins. Someone is calling her children to come in from a day whose losses as yet remain child-sized. So, I am obviously, if you publish a book called Ledger, it's full of accounting. There's lots of numbers. Somehow the love of numbers in poems crept into my work a couple of books ago. I do acts of simple mathematics in poems. There's a poem in the last book, The Beauty, called 0 plus anything is a world. So that's a different kind of mathematics, I suppose. But there's something about numbers that began to feel to me wonderfully grounding, like a little piton of fact that you can put in a poem and everybody knows that it means what it says it means, in the midst of so much that we're not quite sure what it means in this life. So you have a numbers poem, Meryl. Would you read that for us?
The numbers poem and a list poem, and it's called simply What $7,000 Could Buy in 2007. The bones of Alistair Cook, his body awaiting cremation. Information on who abused and abandoned a pit bull in Florida. A designer alligator skin handbag. A high quality video conferencing system. Rapper Keith Murray's stolen laptop with his life's work. A scholarship for a kilt wearing, bagpipe playing college freshman. Donated human eggs from a healthy non-smoker between 20 and 27. Plastic surgery to create six-pack abs. The assassination of Benazir Bhutto.
Wow. So I think, looking at how our time is going, since we want to leave some time for questions from people, I'd like you just to read the next one that
No,
you're
you read.
going to read. No, please. You read Silver Lining, okay?
Okay. Okay, silver lining. How lucky I am to suffer, not as infants and invertebrates do in the moment only, but suffering that endures, in anticipation, in retrospect, pain that lives with me like a bad tooth, the way it makes me chew on the other side of my mouth, the way the tongue can't leave it alone, each careful bite so risky, so delicious.
Mm. So I really wanted to get there because I think it is something you alluded to earlier. Poetry is the great silver lining of my life. Poetry is what allows me, in my most profound grief and bewilderment and times when I have been absolutely flattened, there is something about the statements of those conditions given me by other people with the silver lining of beauty in them that allows the unbearable to become bearable. And so I just think it's a really important thing to acknowledge that how do the poems help us? When you're writing them, they're saving your life every single time. They're saving your sense of agency. They're saving your remembering of the delicious at times when your mouth is full of the ashes of fires, literal and metaphorical. And so, I really wanted us to have that bow to beauty be part of the explicit part of the evening. So
Would you read one more poem to end us?
I will read one more poem, but which? I will read, let's see, we have 10 minutes. I'll read the title poem, which was not at all what I was planning on reading. It's a poem that it's not exactly a rhyming poem, but it's a poem where sound is talking to sound a lot. And that was part of the engine of how it came to say what it says. It was written when I was working, Robert Rauschenberg's former estate for art making on Captiva Island in Florida is now an artist retreat. And they only have one poet there at a time because there's only one space which is suitable for writers. But it mentions an island that's 5 feet above sea level, and that is Captiva Island, where I was. It was one of the ways that I came to recognize that climate change was not in the future, it was in the present. I was there during the rainiest 2 months in Florida history. And on that 5-foot high island, all of us were waiting between our studios and our living spaces and where we would eat. It was, sea rise was wetting our calves. So this is Ledger. Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin is 3,592 measures. A voice kept far from feeling is heard as measured. What's wanted in desperate times are desperate measures. Pushkin's unfinished Onegin, 5,446 lines. No visible tears measure the pilot's grief as she lidars the height of an island, 5 feet. 50, its highest leaf. She logs the years, the weathers the tree has left. A million fired clay bones, animal, human, set down in a field as protest, measure 400 yards long, 60 yards wide, weigh 112 tons. The length and weight and silence of the bereft. Bees do not question the sweetness of what sways beneath them. One measure of distance is meters, another is li. 10,000 li can be translated far. For the exiled, home can be translated then, translated scar. 1 liter of Polish vodka holds 12 pounds of potatoes. What we care about most we call beyond measure. What matters most we say counts. Height now is treasure. On this scale of 1 to 10, where is 11? Ask all you wish, no 25th hour will be given. Measuring mounts, like some Western bar's mounted elk head, our cataloged, vanishing, unfinished heaven.
I love that poem and I love your book, Ledger. I hope everybody buys a copy because they should, it's a treasure beyond measure.
I don't
thank
think
you
I had that
both.
rhyme word in there. So
Thank you both for that incredible reading. I'd like to invite everyone who's listening, if you have a question, to send it through the chat to me and I will pose it to Meryl and Jane. And while you're typing, maybe I'll just start off by asking you both to talk a little bit about what your writing life has been in these months. What are you working on? How are you working?
You go first, Jane.
Well, because my book came out March 10th, which was literally the day that everything changed in America, and I was supposed to be on a long book tour with a lot of events, the first months were this scramble of mostly prose, written interviews, learning how to Zoom, learning how to make a video when I'd never so much as taken a selfie. So I probably wrote a half book's worth of prose during the first months, but no poems at all. All my poetry energy was going into, this book that had just been born. And it is only in the very recent weeks that I have begun to tiptoe back into writing poems, and I could not be happier. There were other things in life that took attention also this summer. So it's been a time of much buffeting and much gratitude for other people's poems.
So I've had about the inverse experience to Jane's. So my book also was coming out right at the beginning of the pandemic, but somehow I went into a frenzy of writing. And I invented another form called a viral, which is a poem about the virus that doesn't use any of the words about the virus at all. And I wrote some poems I called Dislocations. They were all very dark. And then kind of taking off from the Looseplex, instead of just cutting up my poems, I thought, well, there's a whole world of poems out there. I think I'll do some centos, which is poems comprised of other people's lines. And I did a whole series of those, and I was really inspired. And that all lasted maybe through June. And then, like, by the time June came, it just somehow I had thought this would be over. I had a very unrealistic vision of what this was going to be. And I developed a sort of allergy to poetry, and I I couldn't read it, and I couldn't watch it, and I hated it. And so I felt very, very alienated from the very thing that I mostly find solace in. But then I got a copy of the selected letters of John Berryman, who happens to be one of my hero poets. I think he has done, the Dream Songs are amazing, and I've always loved them. And I read that whole 626 pages of letters and 100 pages of notes and footnotes, and I wrote a review of it, and it brought me back into my love of poetry. I haven't actually written any yet, but I did write a review of that, and I felt reconciled to the fact that sometimes it's just impossible to write, because he really struggles with his manic productivity and his desperate unproductivity. And so it seemed okay to me to be feeling alienated. That's a long
You
answer.
know, you
Great.
actually reminded me, I forgot that I did write one poem on March 17th, the first day of Shelter in Place, which went entirely viral and is now, you know, all the anthologies it's in are starting to arrive at the house now. And I somehow forgot that there was that one day when the silence was so steep and so sudden that I just stopped and listened and wrote this one poem titled "Today When I Could Do Nothing." And it's had a whole life while I was busy not writing anything else. So what else, Amanda?
Well, we could do a very quick one-word answer from Cielo. He wants to know pen or pencil.
Keyboard.
Pen on the backs of old drafts torn in half.
Great. And Mark has a question for you, Jane. Could you describe what you mean by, quote, a kerosene beauty?
So I lived with kerosene lamps for 3 years when I was at Tassajara in the wilderness, in the Ventana Wilderness, Santa Lucia Mountains. And kerosene, of course, at that time, that was the early 70s, we didn't quite realize the environmental damage of living by kerosene light. But it's very beautiful. It's very warm. And it is literally warm. And if all you've got in your cabin is no heat, plastic over the windows, and a few kerosene lamps going, after an hour or two, they warm the place up. But I mean by it this very mixed image of it casts light, it burns, it sustains, you can read by it, but we know now the damage of using that fuel to lead our lives by. I don't know if that's enough of an answer. It's a phrase, for those of you who don't know it, it's a phrase from the poem, Let Them Not Say. But for me, it is honoring the petroleum economy, which we must cease. But it pays respect to the great beauty and what it has allowed all of us to do all of these years, to have light to read by and warmth to sit by.
Do we have time for one more? We have more questions than we're ever going to get to.
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes. I just want to say something before we get to more questions, is how moving it is to see the faces of the people I know in the audience. It's just so lovely. Thank you all for coming.
Well, there's a there's a fun question. I don't know what you'll make of it. In the movie Patterson, Adam Driver, whose birthday it is, plays a poet. If a movie were to be made about you, who would you want to play you?
Oh, well, that's his Meryl Streep, right? Meryl.
I have no idea. Next question.
All right, the next question is another for Jane from David. Would you share some background context on your short and powerful poem, Like Others, maybe with regard to the pandemic and the past 4 years?
I'm so happy to have that poem brought up. It's a poem that I sort of felt, I really love that little poem, and I haven't heard a great deal about it. I had trouble finding a magazine to take it. You know, it went out like 9 times before somebody took it. It's very short. Can I read it?
Yes, read it.
Of
But of course,
course.
then I have to find it. It's in here somewhere. Ah, okay. So thank you, whichever David you are, thank you for noticing that poem, because it's an important poem to me, for me. Like others. In the end, I was like others, a person, sometimes embarrassed, sometimes afraid. When fire was shouted, some ran toward it, some away. I neck deep among them. So I have fought a forest fire all the way through. I have a relationship with fire, and facing it and respecting it. And I have a relationship to being a human being. And that, I don't know, there's a word I have been thinking of a great deal over the last couple of years is humility. And that old-fashioned virtue and its importance, that we're not so special, we're not so different. We are simply a person with all of the failings of every other person and all of the strengths of every other person. And, you know, to admit that is to give up the pretense of separation, of specialness. And I just find it a great relief. I really do. You know, I'm just like everybody else. And when you yell fire, some people are brave and they just race to put it out. And some people are racing to save their skin. And I am neck deep with both types. And to me, that was, I can't say why it felt like a recognition that felt very good to say out loud. I just know it does. To me, it feels very good to say this out loud. You know, I'm neck deep. My fate is the fate of everyone. My life is the life of everyone. Nothing says that, you know, the political actions I've taken every day for the last 4 years made any difference. We're all in this together. And that's some of what sits behind that poem.
Well, I appreciate so much being neck deep with the two of you tonight. Thank you. I know Jason has some words to close things down, but just I want to thank you for letting me be a part of this.
Well, thank you, and congratulations on that forthcoming book. That sounds marvelous.
And Amanda, I've never had such a wonderful introduction, really. That was pretty fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks all three of you. That was really wonderful and lovely. And I wish I had thought ahead of time to get myself some tea and light myself some candles, because that was like very soothing. And especially at a time when just overdosed on news all day long, it was just really nice to just sit here and indulge in some of this wonderful writing for an hour. And I especially like the way that Jane just wrap things up with this idea that all of our fates are all tied in with each other, which is also a very Jewish concept, and something that we talk about a lot. So thank you, all three of you, and everyone that attended. Thank you so much. Just really quickly, want to share that this program was free this evening, as many, if not most, of our programs are, and that's all thanks to the generosity of our donors, and we really appreciate, especially in these times, anything and everything. So if you have enjoyed this evening and other programs that we do, please feel free to go to marinjcc.org/donate, marinjcc.org/donate. And of course, I should also add the Marin Poetry Center as well. You can go to their website, and it will all be appreciated. So thanks to everyone that joined. We had a little bit of technical difficulties at the beginning, so we did manage to record the second half of this evening, and we'll have that up on YouTube in a couple of days. And thank you all for joining, and it's been lovely to have you. And thank you again to Jane and Meryl and Amanda. So,
Thank you.
good night, everybody. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Right.